This is Arkies in the Beltway, your look at national politics and the Arkansans influencing the discussions. I'm Alex Thomas, Washington correspondent for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, reporting from the nation's capital. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Arkies in the Beltway for the week of December 21st, 2025. The Justice Department has started releasing files on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, with images of former President Bill Clinton among those in the first tranche. The Trump administration faced a December 19th deadline to release all information regarding Epstein and the investigation into sex crimes involving minors. Despite this, officials acknowledge Friday's release does not include all the files, and more records will be published in the coming weeks. Among the thousands of released records, pictures of former President Clinton with Epstein and others, including women whose identities have been redacted. None of the pictures show Clinton engaging in any wrongdoing. Angel Urania, the former president's deputy chief of staff, criticized the file's release, saying in a statement the Justice Department is trying to protect President Donald Trump over his relationship with Epstein. Urania adds Clinton knew nothing of Epstein's crimes and was among the people who cut Epstein off once those crimes came to light. On Capitol Hill, the Senate and House of Representatives have finished their work for the year. One of the last items receiving the House's approval, Representative Bruce Westerman's permitting bill. The SPEED Act addresses permitting for energy and infrastructure projects, specifically the National Environmental Policy Act and the requirement for environmental reviews. Westerman of Hot Springs has served as the chair of the House Natural Resources Committee since January 2023. He says the current permitting system has become too complex, resulting in bureaucratic headaches and project delays.
I doubt there is a single member of the House who has not heard of a NEPA horror story from a family construction company or a local official back home. Today, the word NEPA is more synonymous with red tape and waste than genuine environmental protection.
The SPEED Act instructs federal agencies to limit environmental reviews of projects to the effects sharing a close and proximate relationship. The legislation also places new limits on legal challenges against projects. Westerman says his bill should result in the permitting process becoming more fair.
By restoring NEPA to its original intent, the SPEED Act will expedite infrastructure projects, bring down prices, and help Americans realize the energy dominance and mineral abundance our natural resources promise.
The push to change permitting comes amid increased opposition toward renewable energy. The Trump administration has increased scrutiny of wind and solar energy projects, even canceling billions of dollars in clean energy grants earlier this year. Republican leaders tweaked the SPEED Act's language during the final week of votes to preserve the White House's ability to cancel offshore wind projects. California Representative Jared Huffman is the top Democrat on the House Natural Resources Committee. He says House Republicans should have worked more with their Democratic colleagues on the permitting measure.
The bill takes a sledgehammer to the National Environmental Policy Act, one of our foundational environmental laws.
The Senate will need to consider the SPEED Act in the new year. Unlike the House and its simple majority rule for passing legislation, the Senate requires 60 votes for most bills. Westerman told reporters after last Thursday's vote he has been talking with his Senate counterparts about getting the SPEED Act into law. Arkansas could feel the impact of this year's annual defense policy measure thanks to language calling for expanding munitions production. The Senate and House approved the National Defense Authorization Act before leaving Capitol Hill for the holidays. The nearly $901 billion measure authorizes defense policy and military spending. This year's legislation calls for expanding munitions manufacturing, which could affect facilities in the natural state. There is the Highland Industrial Park in East Camden, home to multiple defense contractors. And there's also the Pine Bluff Arsenal in Jefferson County. That installation is the only North American facility capable of filling white phosphorus munitions, which produce smoke screens difficult to extinguish. The site's future, however, has been in doubt, as the Pentagon has considered consolidating operations across the country. Senators Tom Cotton and John Bozeman, as well as Representative Westerman, have spent part of this year urging the U.S. Army to protect the arsenal. Cotton of Little Rock says the Army should not have even considered plans that would have moved operations away from Jefferson County.
I thought that was gravely misguided. I've worked on the munitions crisis for years. Pine Bluff Arsenal is a critical solution to the munitions crisis we have.
The senator adds the munitions language should not only protect the Pine Bluff Arsenal, but also lead to the installation producing components of other munitions.
It has environmental permits, it has facilities and land, so it's uniquely well positioned to not just continue its current workload, but expand that workload.
This year's defense measure also authorizes federal dollars for expanding the C-130 training mission at Little Rock Air Force Base. This will allow for newer planes and additional training opportunities. As we bring this week's episode to a close, a note about this production's future. Some of you may recall when Arkies in the Beltway began in September 2023, it was originally a weekly video series. That ambitious plan lasted 3 weeks. Multiple factors led us to change the show to an audio podcast, and it's been that way for more than 100 episodes. We took you to every corner of the U.S. Capitol, introduced you to political leaders from across the country, pressed Arkansas's lawmakers on issues impacting every corner of the state, and even heard from some of you, the Arkansans, influencing the discussions. As this year draws to a close, so does a chapter of this production. This is not just the final Arkies in the Beltway episode of 2025, but the last episode of the podcast for the foreseeable future. Now, I want to make one thing clear. The Democrat-Gazette is not getting rid of its Washington correspondent position. I plan to continue roaming the halls of the Capitol, following the biggest stories and how national issues impact the natural state. This production is just going on hiatus, and when it comes back, it may not be identical to the podcast you're listening to now. But whatever the product looks like, the goal will remain the same, making sure you understand how what happens in Washington affects the great state of Arkansas. So with that being said, you can stay up to date with all news involving Arkansas at arkansasonline.com. Special thanks, as always, to the team down in Little Rock. I'm Alex Thomas, and for now, that was Arkies in the Beltway. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.